Paul Butterfield, thanks for coming on. Voices of Enablement. Been looking forward to this day for a while. To be frank, I know you and I've gone back and forth. We've spent a lot of time together on totally separate initiatives and projects, but glad to have the two worlds meeting and colliding here. For those who don't know, Paul Butterfield, president, SES, Sales Enablement Society, also founder of the Revenue Flywheel Group, which is a enablement consulting group. And so excited to have you on. Excited to kind of dig into elevating enablement, talking about, how do we align to sales leadership and how do we show our impact. And so if you don't mind, kind of give a quick introduction of yourself and then we'll jump into the material.
Sure. You're right. It seems like we've had many conversations. I mean, you've got the enablement tour that's been a huge success this year. And so finally coming together to do this. So I appreciate the invite. Looking forward to it.
Of course.
I probably the easiest thing for people, most interesting thing people know about me, just from a professional level, is most of my career was spent up until 2012 in selling or leading sales teams. And, I led a group for Microsoft, Intuit, et cetera. But since 2012, I've had the opportunity to build out global enablement strategies, frameworks, measurements, all of it, because I've always been a believer in what I call customer journey enablement. It shouldn't just be sales, and had a chance to do that for 3 times, and decided to take my part-time and go full-time earlier this year. And that's where Revenue Flywheel Group came from. So awesome. That's me.
Awesome. Well, thanks again. Excited to have you. So obviously the main topic of Voices of Enablement, which is what we've been really focused on, is this: times are kind of tough. There's a looming recession, or whatever you want to call it, just something not good happening financially across the globe.
Something wicked this way comes.
Right. And unfortunately, a lot of the people getting in the short end of the stick are people in enablement. They're often seen as support functions or cost centers. And we're seeing this trend over and over and over again. They're typically the first to go. And so we wanted to create some space where people who are very experienced in enablement, have done it before, have built it from the ground up, like yourself, multiple times, to speak to how do we elevate it? How do we move from the support function to the strategic function that it really is and really should be within organizations? And so that's obviously kind of the main topic for today. But just to get us started, how do we tactically within an organization? Let's say someone's been in a role for a very short period of time, and they're trying to figure out, how do they go about this enablement thing in their business? What would you say to them on how do you elevate your role from being seen as support to being seen as strategic? Where would you start?
Actually, what I'd like to do is start just with a couple of definitions, because there's a lot of talk about this, which I think is a healthy thing. It's good. It's something that the enablement community has needed to talk about, in my opinion, for years.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people talking about operational enablement versus strategic enablement. That, to me, doesn't resonate when it's split out as two different things. To me, they have to come together. A strategy without operationalizing, there we go, say that, is not going to be executed. And random acts of enablement or purely reactive enablement will not long-term have impact without a strategy. So just for the context of our conversation, I may refer to both, but to me, they're working together.
I love that.
Back to your question, if somebody's already in place, and we're going to have to make some assumptions here. Hopefully they report to the CRO, because that is, or whoever the chief sales officer leader is, because that's going to make this a lot easier. Even if you've been in the role for a little while, take a step back and start thinking about so this is the first thing I do, assess how has your program or certifications, whatever you've been doing, how has that had impact, or has it had impact? So that's where I would start. Figure that out. Now, if you haven't been measuring all along, you probably have to do more anecdotal feedback, but that's okay. If you've got access to Tableau and the tables and things in there, you may be able to do a lot better than that. But one way or another, try to create some correlation. And the reason I say that is that way, when you go in to do the next step I'm going to talk about, you want to be able to show some of that, as opposed to maybe going in and saying, hey, I haven't been having any impact, but here's how I'm going to change. So start with that. The next important thing is to understand from your CRO, what are the top 3 top line, well, I guess it could be bottom line, but financial metrics that they care about. Might be what they're being measured on. It might be what the board goals have been given. It doesn't matter. There are at least 3 that individual is being measured on and cares the most about. I'm sure there's more than 3. The reason we focus on 3 is just statistically, and studies have shown that it's difficult to really have impact in change management on doing more than that at once. Yeah. So that's where you start. Now, once you understand what that is, now you can start to think strategically about building blocks. I'm not talking frameworks. Right? This is at that 50,000 foot view. What are the elements, is maybe a better word, of your enablement strategy that need to be in place to impact one or 2 or 3, doesn't matter, of those revenue goals. And that's where you start to map to. So whether you're coming in brand new in the organization or you're doing a reboot, for lack of a better word, that's where I would start. And
that's really good.
Yeah, I'll just leave it at
that. Isn't that what a good salesperson does?
Should be.
Figuring out what are those business priorities and objectives, and then figuring out how to align to those.
Yeah.
I've said this a couple times in the past, and you tell me if you would agree. I think you would. A good enabler is a good seller internally.
Oh, I would agree. You've got intern. I mean, you're having to go and fight for resources. I think that's the right word. You need to be able to go in to QBRs and other environments with leadership, and not so much sell the program like in a salesy way, but help them catch the vision. That's on us to help them catch the vision of the impact that enablement's having, not the other way around. They're not going to probably connect the dots. And it's always selling at some level and helping people, because it's the sale of ideas. It's the sale of resource requests. It's the selling of, here's the impact if you do these things, and helping. And just like buyers, as you said, it's on us to help them create a vision of how the business will run better and more profitably with whatever it is that we are talking to them about.
I really like the concept of focusing on 2 or 3 as well. I think focus is important, and that's why you pick 2 or 3. It also allows you to tie your resources to something very tangible, or your requests, probably better said, to something tangible. I'm curious. This is something that I've heard a couple times. I actually heard it in our first roadshow in Boston, ironically enough. An enablement leader said, I negotiate with my internal stakeholders on what enablement is and what enablement isn't. Do you think that that's something that probably doesn't get done enough by enablement leaders today? They just end up, you mentioned random acts of enablement. I think it's one of my favorite phrases, even though it's obviously a negative. I think it perfectly sums up what a lot of people feel. Do you think that's because there is a lack of direction, or a lack of, like, let's say, guardrails or boundaries that enablers are putting in place?
Yes. A blanket, yes. But let me explain a little bit. Going back to what we were talking about a few minutes ago, that's where you start to create that definition of what is enablement. When you're putting together strategic building blocks, then you're putting together, we haven't really gotten into this yet, but then you're putting together, how are you going to scorecard against those? And there are a lot of things that we measure in enablement, but in this case, we want to measure how that strategy impact is happening. How many times have you seen a strategy roll out with great fanfare, and 6 months later, nobody in the company can tell you what it is? That's why the scorecarding piece of the strategy is so critical. Now, I mentioned that because if you and your CRO, and there may be other stakeholders that come in, but once you're in alignment on what those building blocks are that are needed in order to support and drive the revenue outcomes that you identified together, now you're able to start talking that way to your other internal stakeholders. Just by virtue of doing that, you're putting some definition around what is enablement responsible for, what are the, what are the partnerships that need to be in place. And again, this is at the higher level. You really haven't gotten into setting specific operational product programs and things like that. But that's where it begins. Now, once that's in place, finding ways to consistently communicate back out to those stakeholders, and again, meet them where they are. They don't probably care that much about how many people passed X certification unless there's impact. And when I got into enablement, it was a Q3 of 2012. And I was asked to leave my role as a sales director and go figure out how to build enablement by our brand new EVP. And it was quite the journey. And it was very difficult to measure impact back then, but we even still found ways to do it in 2012. Now, and I've developed better ways, more technologies come online. I've learned more. Now there's really no excuse not to do it. Even if you can't afford the technology, the kind of strategy mapping, scorecarding I'm talking about, you could build in Excel, if nothing else. So we really need to be getting better and smarter at doing it. But that's where so back to your question though. But it's those kind of communications out. It's those kind of scorecards showing impact. It's getting some time in the QBRs. It's coming to their sales. One of the things I found ideal is when I am invited, or someone on my team is invited, to the weekly sales meetings that the sales leaders already have in place, so that we're both observing, but also when given the opportunity, be able to talk about and get feedback on what's going with enablement. But if you're communicating and you have a plan like that, and you're again, have been thoughtful and strategic before really jumping in, is everybody going to buy in? It's not. You're always going to have some that
Lone
still don't
wolf.
see the value of enablement and this, that, and the other thing. But you are putting yourself in a very different situation and setting yourself up for success.
100%. 100%. I think it's very well said. Something you said that really catches my attention, because I've been saying this a lot recently too, as a seller, and we can dig into this a little bit more in a minute, and we'll table this, but the sales manager, key for this thing to work. I really, really believe they're the linchpin for it all to kind of come together. So we'll table that for a minute, because I want to get to something else, make it something a little more tactical, because you started talking about these like specific initiatives and what you're incorporating in these programs and QBRs and those types of things. You know, what I see happen a lot, and you probably see this even more than I see it, a lot of enablement functions get classified under like training, right? They get classified as training. It's like enablement equals training. They equal onboarding, and that's what they unfortunately get lumped into, which that's a part of it for sure, obviously, but it's not the whole picture. And in a time where there's probably not a lot of new hires right now, most organizations are not hiring aggressively. Most are consolidating.
Fair.
How does that change what enablement is doing? Those enablers who've been really focused on onboarding and reducing ramp time for most of their career, and now no longer have that as a priority. Maybe they're now focused on CS. They've never done that before, but that's a priority in the business. Or now they're focused on partner enablement or something totally different. What, in your mind, how does it change your approach? And what are the things that you should be doing a little differently than, again, say, building courses in an LMS and onboarding your reps?
Well, building courses in LMS doesn't ever really go away.
True.
But that's a means to an end. It should not be your objective. And I don't know that onboarding, most people I know are still doing some element of onboarding. So I'm sure, though, it's very scaled back. But take a look at that onboarding. So let's start with where I'm going to go with what else could you be focused on. How is your onboarding setting up all of the different teams you support? You mentioned CS. What about BDRs? Of course, people think of commercial sales reps, enterprise sales reps. Another one that gets forgotten sometimes, another group, is sales engineers. Sales engineers should not just be put in the back room with everybody else. Yes, those first orientation type things, maybe, but what is going on for them differently and separately, because it's a very different set of skills, not just deeper knowledge, but understanding different process, things like that. So take a look at your onboarding and figure out, is everybody coming out of a cookie cutter type of experience? And if they are, the first thing I would do is start to figure out, work with your leaders and your stakeholders, what does an actual ramping pathway look like for that person? Maybe everybody still comes together 3 days, 5 days, whatever that is, right, for that common experience. But at the most, after that week, what are they doing in individual ramping? There will be overlap, of course, but there should also be unique. BDRs may have a 10-day ramp period. Sales engineers might have a 6-month ramp period, but that's what you need to figure out. And the reason I say that is, until you have that, it's difficult to really figure out what does everboarding look like. Some people call it everboarding, ongoing professional development. It's just how I've always thought of it. But you have a way to figure that out. You know where they're coming from. You know how to pick it up. Now, what about all your existing sellers? Okay, that sounds great, but haven't been doing that. There are a number of ways that, people can find competency frameworks and mapping, different ways to do that online. I suspect there might be some of that content on your site. To me, it can even be a relatively simple thing. Again, I'm speaking to armies of 1 or 2 as well as larger groups. Something as simple as creating a spreadsheet. This would work more with a smaller organization, but it is effective. And coming up with, across the top of the spreadsheet, what by sales stage, by whatever sales stages that you have in Salesforce, by sales stage, what are the skills that you and the leaders agree a salesperson, in this case, we'll say salesperson, needs to have to execute stage 1, execute stage 2, et cetera, all the way through close 1 or close lost. Then then down the left side, list the reps. And with some simple reps names and with a couple of simple formulas, you make it very easy for your leaders to create a heat map. So all they have to do at that point is for, Sue Jones, top line, you're going to go across, give her a 1, 2, or 3 in each of the skill boxes, which will, with the formula built in, will turn it red, yellow, green. And by the time the leader has finished that, you've got a pretty useful, and I'm pretty visual, so I like heat maps, but you can look at that and start to figure out where the current, that is, yes, that's a simple way to do it. There are more sophisticated ways, but start with what you can do. And then now you can start to think, okay, this is where the group is. Here's the professional development we need to pick up. But I want to go back to what I said. Start with making sure they're getting a good foundation when they're coming in. And then also figure out, what does a long-term PD look like? Another area, if you've got more resources, it's a weird thing, Will. People are doing less onboarding, but they may also have less people on the team. But I love what you mentioned, some of the other groups. Another area that gets often overlooked is leadership enablement. And Revenue leaders need it as much as anybody. One of the most common sad stories we've all seen in sales is rockstar rep gets a promotion and is gone inside of, you know, 12 to 18 months.
They don't know how to manage.
Because they can't clone themselves, which is typically what happens. When that
Yep.
doesn't work, they become super closers. And it's not really their fault. Often they have received no training. I've even seen situations or enablement. I've also seen situations where new leaders are brought in from the outside and they don't go through even the same onboarding as new salespeople or marketing people in the organization. Why not? Yes, if they're a VP, you're going to want to make that a customized experience and get them meetings and things that the others wouldn't need. But that's another area where I see typically enablement teams come together and you know, it's more a mature thing. So,
Paul, both of those are killer. The spreadsheet, I think if anyone who listens to this podcast, if they are not doing that or something like that, just stop everything you're doing and just do that. Just do it right now. There's no reason that you shouldn't do that. I think, and this is a sales rep saying that, so that should mean a lot. A sales rep saying, I don't always know where I struggle. Like, I know that I'm not maybe the best on the team, but I know that I'm pretty good. So I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing, and I'll maybe follow some influencers on LinkedIn and read some sales books, and like I'll be good, right? But that's not really how it happens. It's the individual coaching, the customized coaching is another way somebody has framed it to me that I think is really, really important. And what I like about your example is you could take it a couple different ways. As you were talking about it, I thought, okay, yeah, that's a manager or enablement leader assessing the rep. Imagine if you took it one step further and you incorporated some self-assessment as well. I'm a rep.
Sure.
You require me to assess on a gong call where I struggled, and you can start to incorporate those into the scoring. Man, you have something powerful there. Really, really powerful.
Well, you do. But when you're starting to bring in technology like conversational intelligence, that's taking it next level. The spreadsheet example I talked about is great. Again, it's helpful for what it is, but to my opinion, conversational intelligence is one of the biggest advances in being able to look at leading indicators within enablement functions and for sales leaders and for coaching purposes. That was always one of the toughest things to figure out. Leading indicators. Sure, we've always had things like time to first, how quickly do they get to a full funnel coverage? How quickly do they? I'm not a fan of first deal, who knows what they inherited, but
I'm a second deal.
How quickly can they do their qualified closed opportunity? Things like that. Those have been easy, but what about these other leading indicators? So now we look at behavior. We can talk, these are pretty sophisticated tools. We can figure out, are they using the language that we've been talking about? Maybe just as importantly, are they not using language that we know helps, confuses customers, or is too much jargon, or perhaps just doesn't really help them see our company's position and value prop? So if you can get conversational intelligence, absolutely recommend it. And you can build scorecards, all sorts of things. If you can also afford another piece of technology, that would be any good enablement platform. And there's a lot of them out there, but to me, I would want one that had a way to help me do that correlation in more sophisticated ways.
Yep, completely agree. I think that's spot on. All right, I'm gonna unpark and lot our topic from a moment ago because I think it's relevant in this moment. Sales managers. We've talked a lot about them, just they're there, they're important. But I think a lot of people struggle, and it's not necessarily their fault, but I think a lot of people in enablement struggle with getting sales managers to buy in. Because as a rep, I can tell you, if my sales manager is not bought in, you're not talking. I mean, I'm not going to listen to anything you say.
I was the same way.
It is what it is. And it's not the enabler's fault at all. It's just that person decides if I keep my job or not. That person tells the VP of sales if I'm a good rep or not. And I'm going to do what I know that they're prioritizing. It is what it is. So have you seen anything or done anything in your experience that maybe helps to incorporate sales managers, or is there something you look for or something you try to do? Give us some examples.
Well, first thing I'll go back to is that enablement piece. Have your frontline sales leaders, especially, have they ever been taught, for example, the difference between coaching and pipeline review?
Yeah.
They're very different motions, but that's not intuitive, at least from what I've seen for a lot of folks.
True.
Do they understand how to look at a pipeline in a more sophisticated way? Often you'll hear, 2.7x. That's our ideal pipeline coverage. That's great. But if 90% of that's in stage 1 or 2 and you're in the third month of your quarter, you're in trouble.
True.
And so how, do they know how to look at that more sophisticated? Perhaps Rev Ops provided reports they can use, perhaps they need to do it for themselves, but they need to be doing. So those are a couple of examples. First, figure out, have they been equipped with the skills and the ability to be effective and help be those change agents that we all need them to be.
Really good.
Then the next thing is involving them. It's always a dance between getting feedback, but not being able to incorporate everybody's feedback.
Yep.
because it even contradicts itself often if you talk to enough people. But giving people a voice and trying to understand what's going on, in my experience, most people, I mean, they understand you can't incorporate everything. And where you're starting off, as we said at the beginning of the conversation, in alignment with your CRO or CSO's top 3 revenue outcomes, as long as everything's mapping back up to one or more of those, you know you're on safe ground with the executive team. And it also helps you frame that conversation with frontline leaders. Great. Let's talk about that. You want us to do an X training, right? Let's look at that more holistically. What are the outcomes that you're looking for? A lot of times they don't know that. And so that's a conversation that needs to happen before you can really have any serious thought. Yep. But then also help them figure out, well, how does that map back to, these other things? But involve them in the conversation. Another thing, this sounds so, people may listen and be like, well, duh, but I've seen it not happen in enough organizations. And that is when you're rolling out something new, whether it's a new tool, a new methodology, it doesn't matter. Take your leaders through it first. Let them be comfortable with the tech or comfortable with methodologies in a safe environment where they're with their peers. I mean, it's already a risk to ask questions in training settings like that. But in front of your reps, most people aren't going to do it. Yeah. And so give them that safe peer-to-peer learning environment. But then the other benefit is, when I was a sales leader, I wanted to always be a couple steps ahead of where the team was so that I could be planning, so that I knew how to help coach on it. So that's the first thing I would start with doing. And then make it easy for them. Anytime there's a major change, could be going from classic to lightning Salesforce, could be any major change.
Whatever.
Help them know how to message that. Now, this sometimes may bring our product marketing teams in to this, may bring Rev Ops if it's something like a big Salesforce change. So bring the right stakeholders, but maybe it's for example, giving them a coaching guide that they could use until they get comfortable with the changes themselves. Perhaps it is, in the case of methodology rollout, don't leave it to them to figure out how to reinforce in their sales meeting. I've written in one company, for example, for our methodology, I wrote an 8-week coaching playbook for them, where for 8 weeks in their weekly sales meetings, they would say, okay, we're going to talk about X. This is what I want you to come prepared to talk about. And I'd give them exercises or role plays or things to run through, so that in an 8-week cycle, they will have refreshed everything their team had just learned in a recent methodology rollout. So that's one example. But again, think about what they have time to do. Think about all of the things that they're being asked to do that frankly have nothing to do with helping their sellers close.
So much.
And helping their sellers get better. They're not. And so as enablers, we need to think about, all right, what are the few critical things that only a frontline sales leader can do? Pipeline review, one-on-one coaching, deal reinforcement, all of those things. When I was a sales leader, I wanted to see someone's pitch before they took it on the street. No offense, but I didn't trust anybody else to tell me their pitch was street ready. So there's some things that only that frontline leader could do. Then figure out, how does enablement support all the rest of that ecosystem that a salesperson needs.
Yeah, I've never thought about this, but as you're talking about it, I'm in my head, this is like so silly, but I'm thinking, if someone in enablement can make themselves so indispensable to the sales managers, they're not going anywhere.
No, I would agree. And you're never going to have 100% buy-in from any group, whether it's sales managers, sales reps. But when you're building the relationships, when you're working, and here's the best of all, Will, if you're able to document those results, then it becomes kind of a no-brainer. As far as whether the sales leaders, they may not even agree with 100% of what you've done, but if it's getting results for the team, well, okay. Maybe we can just agree to disagree on that one, type of thing.
Yeah, I agree. I like that. I like that a lot. Man, there's so much to unpack, but I'm looking at the time. So let's, I 2 more questions for you.
Sure.
One is a little more tactical and one's a little more broad strokes. We'll end with the broad strokes. So a little more tactical. You mentioned Rev Ops, and you've mentioned a few like sales process enablement kind of related things, even a little sales operations responsibilities you've mentioned. What is the relationship between enablement and Rev Ops? I've seen it a little contentious at times. I've seen it hand in glove sometimes. What is that relationship? What should it look like in your opinion? How much overlap is there? Give me a little bit of a picture of that. I mean, you've been around the block for a while. You've probably seen good and bad. What do you think is the right way?
The first thing I'll start with is, in my experience, the right way is not to have enablement report to Rev Ops. They are separate functions. They are parallel functions. They really need to be reporting up to two different leaders that are likely peers or close to peer level, right?
Yeah.
That doesn't solve for the problem.
Sure.
The areas where I see overlap the most often are, first, with technology. There's a lot of technology, almost any technology I'm going to say right now, that an enablement team might be evaluating is going to impact Salesforce or some other system that Rev Ops is responsible for, right? Yeah. And so they need to be involved in that process from that standpoint. Now, it may not make sense to have it go all the way through. Perhaps you're looking at 3 vendors. You kind of get down to one that now you start doing your due diligence. So you want to bring that Rev Ops crew in some time before that happens, because they will have opinions on that. Then let's look at it the other way. There are things, say, I mean, if you want to mention a brand name like Clary, I think that's pretty safe, right? That is really going to be a Rev Ops decision to bring in. But who's going to be responsible to teach the teams how to use Clary, how to read the dashboards, how to run reports? So enablement needs to be involved early enough in those conversations that they can build relationships with the CS teams. Anytime I buy technology, I let the vendor CS teams know that you're on the hook with serious skin in the game while we roll this out, right? Once my team is taught how to do the frontline support and training for you, great. But during deployment, it's all you. We're here to learn and we'll work with you. So, but if anyone can get those relationships early, as opposed to all of a sudden being given, hey, we're rolling this out next week, but you're going to need to train on it. So those are two areas of overlap. The other big area of overlap I see is data. Most enablement organizations don't have the ability to go in and get their own correlation data. They maybe have figured out what they want it to be, what they think it should be. That also should be alignment with sales leaders and probably to some degree the Rev Ops teams, but they may be dependent upon getting that data pulled for them from Rev Ops. It's critical to have great working relationships with our stakeholders. I've talked to you before, I think, about my concept of three-legged stool. Enablement, it's enablement, Rev Ops, and product marketing. And those three are just, without one, the other two are going to wobble. So that relationship should already be a key one that you're working on. But be sensitive to the fact that Rev Ops often gets a lot of demands from the board. If you're PE backed, especially, I've been through that. You know, those folks typically want to see data carved up 1,000 different ways. And any requests that you need, get those in early, or perhaps you can find ways for them to help you self-serve, build dashboards and Salesforce. But be sensitive to the fact that they often get a lot of other demands with little notice, and build that relationship. But that's where the overlap comes, is data. If you have the luxury of getting a tool and a platform that integrates with Salesforce, and you can do that for yourself, great. But don't let that, you know, for example, at Instructure, props to our Rev Ops team there, they built inside a Tableau what they called the One Ring. And it was that exact reference, because you could really go in there and find anything that you wanted from a sales data standpoint. It was brilliant. One of the best tools I've ever seen. But that's the only time I've ever had something like that. So it's usually not that self-serve. So those are the big areas where I see the relationships working together, that they really need to work well together and where they overlap.
Yeah. So it sounds like to me, I mean, even with managers, it's just relationship building. You have to build, you have to set the boundaries, you have to build the relationships, you have to constantly negotiate, you have to constantly reaffirm, readdress. And I mean, again, just like a sales process, you are constantly validating where you're at and what the needs are for both of you. So I think it's a great call out. I mean, I'm sure people are going, that sounds easier than it is. You're right. It probably does sound easier than it is in practice, but
everything we've been talking about.
Always. But it still is. It's relationships. It's human to human. It's not going to be easy, but it's something that has to be done. You just got to do it. So it's really, really good.
And you won't get it right the first time.
So
I was just going to say, the other thing, these are not linear things. You're gonna fall. You're gonna find roadblocks. You need to back up and find another way to do it. So to your point, yes, it's not linear. It's not always just going to run nice.
Yeah. Wouldn't it be awesome if it did?
Oh yeah.
Wouldn't it be awesome if all of our companies went like this too?
Right.
Last question, a little more broad stroke. This is more back to people are struggling. I know there's a lot of people in the job market right now, actively interviewing, actively looking for new roles. If you're looking for a new role, what are some of the red flags? You're in the middle of an interview, maybe you're 3 interviews in, and you start hearing some things. What would be a red flag to you? What are some of the things that you would say, I don't know if I want to work here, or I definitely am going to ask some more questions about that, versus what are maybe some green lights? Like, wow, that is that's where I want to be. Well,
the first thing, that's going to vary, I would say, quite a bit depending on what level of role you're interviewing for.
Good point. Yep.
But some high level things I alluded to earlier. Where does enablement report? If enablement doesn't report into that senior sales leadership, I'm not saying that should be a deal breaker for anybody. It would be for me. And it's not that I haven't worked with some very strong and brilliant Rev Ops leaders. I have. But in my experience, they were very different functions and they need to function differently. So that's one of the first things I'd want to understand. I'd want to understand, is this a new enablement role, or has there been enablement before?
Yeah.
Because those are two very different challenges. If there's been enablement before, was it broken? Was it unpopular? Was it party planning? I mean, there's a lot of things that you could find coming in, and this is maybe more coming in as a even a frontline or senior leader in enablement, understanding what's been done before. If it's a brand new function, I would also understand either way, what are the outcomes they're looking for enablement? Why this position? What are the objectives? Talk to them about, try to get them to talk to you about what are some of the financial outcomes or revenue outcomes they want to see. if they can't talk to you about those things, to me, that would be a red flag, because they really haven't thought through the enablement function, which again, wouldn't be, I don't know if it's a deal breaker or not, but I would be concerned that it wasn't well thought out. Even something as read the job descriptions closely when you apply, because I've read many over the years, and some of them you look at it, you can tell right from that they really aren't sure what they want this person to do.
They're like, we need revenue and we think this person will fix it.
Yeah. Or they advertise for a sales. I mean, this is something I see right now going on. They'll advertise for a sales enablement manager or even a senior sales enablement manager. But then you look at the things they want them to do. They're an army of one or two, and they really are asking them to do much more senior work, because this is all has to be built and scope. And so be cautious of that. Yes, you need a job. Don't set yourself up in a role where you're being asked to do things that you don't have the resources and possibly the experience to do.
Yeah,
right,
we're undervalued. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really good advice. Really, really good advice, Paul. Paul, this was honestly excellent. I think just the most important thing to me were just some of the tactical things, like that spreadsheet. It's gonna stick in my mind. I know it's so simple, but something that simple I think is really, really important and impactful. Things that a lot of people aren't doing today. Those relationship building exercises are very important. I think a lot of people are going to get a lot of value from this. So truly, I really appreciate you joining. It's been a long time coming, so I'm glad it finally happened.
Yeah.
That said, before we go, tell everybody how they can find you. Give us an update on SES, like what's going on.
Sure. Okay. I'm easy to find on LinkedIn, and my profile is open for connection invites and things like that. So always happy to connect there. If folks are not members of Sales Enablement Society, then I recommend check it out. We don't have any membership fees. We are 100% practitioner by practitioners for a practitioner, and would love to have you come and join, maybe your local chapter. We have our annual SES experience coming up in San Diego in October, but I'm always, the other place people can reach me is paul@sesociety.org. If they have any questions about any of that, I'll always be happy to respond.
Awesome. Paul, thanks again. Can't say enough about SES and can't say enough about you. So thanks again. I'll see you well, I guess I won't see you in Atlanta, but I'll see you in San Diego.
See you in San Diego. That's right.
We'll hang out then.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.